We forgot that we are spiritual beings living a human experience. Powerful in all ways imaginable, it only takes allowing ourselves to detach from everything and everyone to finally begin deep self-observation.
Have you ever wondered why some women who live alone without a man seem to hold a different kind of presence? There is often a quiet power in their steps, a steadiness in their choices, and something that feels almost ancient behind their eyes. An inward journey. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, believed that the life of the solitary individual often leads to something sacred, an inward journey that touches the very core of the soul. And when a woman walks this path alone, without the distraction or direction of another's will, she begins to encounter something rare, her truest self. Jung didn't see solitude as a failure, but as a stage of individuation, the deep psychological process by which a person integrates the unconscious with the conscious, becoming whole. While society might whisper that something is missing from the life of a woman without a man, Jung would have seen something else entirely, a life ripe with potential for transformation. This woman is not lacking. She is, in fact, becoming. In the silence of her own company, she begins to hear the voices that were once drowned out by noise. The voice of her intuition grows louder. Her dreams become more vivid, and if she listens closely, she can begin to untangle the inner myths that shaped her. These are not just fantasies. They are messages from what Jung called the collective unconscious, the deep well of symbols, stories, and wisdom shared by all of humanity. Women who live alone often face projection. People see what they want or fear in her: independence, defiance, sadness, mystery, loneliness, strength. But none of these labels define her. The truth is, she is a mirror. Jung noted that each of us sees the world not as it is, but as we are. So the woman who walks alone forces others to confront their own discomfort with freedom. She becomes a question in the shape of a person. What would it mean to not be defined by someone else? In many cultures and philosophies, the feminine has long been associated with intuition, chaos, nature, mystery, and the moon. Jung acknowledged the archetype of the anima, the feminine part of the male psyche, and its mirror, the animus, the masculine within the female psyche. A woman alone must confront her animus, not to be dominated by it, but to integrate it, to meet her own inner logic, action, willpower, and direction. In doing so, she doesn't become masculine. She becomes whole. To live without a partner, especially in a world that still defines women by their relational status, takes a certain strength. But strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like making tea in silence, tending a garden, waking alone without sadness, or writing through the night. It's a different kind of bravery, the kind that doesn't demand to be seen, only to be lived. Jung would remind us that every person is called to a unique journey. For some women, that journey demands solitude, not forever, but for long enough to shed everything that is not truly theirs. She might let go of the need to be chosen, the pressure to perform, the fear of growing older alone. And in that letting go, she reclaims something powerful, the ability to choose herself. These women often develop what could be called spiritual stamina. They learn to face discomfort instead of flee from it. They know how to be still without being numb. They begin to notice the rhythms of the world more clearly, the changing of seasons, the shifting of energy, the way the body speaks when no one else is around to drown it out. And through this awareness, they reconnect with something ancient and eternal. There is a parable about a woman who climbs a mountain with no guide. Many laugh at her, saying she will get lost or that she'll be afraid when night falls. But when she returns, her eyes carry the stars. She has seen something that cannot be described, only lived. This is the path of the solitary woman, not a life of absence, but a life of depth. The path of the inner world. What is often missed in conversations about solitude, especially when it involves women living alone, is the psychological transformation it can provoke. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, believed that individuation, the process by which one becomes truly oneself, is never easy. It is often born in silence, nurtured by self-reflection, and sharpened in the fires of solitude. For women who live without a man, this journey can be uniquely profound because they are no longer defining themselves through the mirror of another, but by the compass of their own soul. When a woman begins to walk this path, something begins to shift. At first, it may look like disconnection. Social gatherings become less exciting, small talk feels more draining, and even family dynamics may feel foreign. The outer world seems to shrink, but the inner world begins to whisper. Dreams become louder. Emotions become more intricate. Patterns that once defined her relationships come to light. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, the part of the psyche that holds everything we suppress or ignore. Solitude allows these shadows to come forward, not as enemies, but as messengers. A woman who lives without constant external validation is forced to look inward. She sees herself not through someone else's needs, but through her own essence. This is where true healing begins. The ego, which always wants to be seen, adored, needed, begins to crumble. In its place, something older and wiser rises, the self, as Jung named it. The self does not need to be beautiful, young, or approved of. The self only needs to be real. Jung understood that modern society often fears this process. It teaches women to find value through service, caregiving, or romantic attachment. But when a woman steps away from these roles, even temporarily, she discovers the voice underneath the noise. That voice may have been buried beneath years of expectation, heartbreak, and self-sacrifice. Now, in the stillness of her own space, it rises with clarity. And it speaks a new language, one of intuition, symbols, patterns, and archetypes. She may begin to dream more vividly, seeing ancient figures or encountering her child self. She may feel drawn to old myths, sacred texts, or ancient goddesses. These are not signs of madness. These are signals of awakening. In Jungian terms, they are invitations to wholeness. This is why so many women who live alone begin to develop spiritual practices, not because they are lonely, but because they are listening. Meditation, journaling, or even quiet walks in nature become rituals, not for productivity, but for connection, not for performance, but for presence. In solitude, she becomes her own mirror, her own healer, and her own guide. But this journey is not always gentle. There are days of doubt, nights of grief, and mornings that feel empty. Jung would remind us that this is natural. In fact, it is necessary. To peel away layers of cultural conditioning is to touch both pain and power. A woman who no longer conforms to societal norms is not weak. She is raw. And in that rawness, the true self finds soil to bloom. Eventually, the world outside may still look the same, but her perception shifts. She no longer seeks approval in every glance. She no longer fears being misunderstood. She stops shrinking herself to make others feel comfortable. She learns the sacred art of saying no without guilt, and yes, without needing permission. These are not just signs of independence. These are signs of soulhood. This is why Jung's insights continue to resonate today, because they remind us that solitude, especially for women, is not a punishment or a failure. It is a threshold, a doorway into the vast terrain of inner truth. And once that doorway is crossed, the world will never look the same again. The quiet awakening of inner authority. There is a quiet power that rises in a woman when she is no longer living in reaction to someone else's presence, when her energy is not constantly shaped by compromise, comparison, or caretaking. In the stillness of her own space, a woman begins to awaken something ancient, something that doesn't demand validation from the outside. She begins to listen not to the noise of the world, but to the subtle hum of her own being. Carl Jung often spoke of the individuation process, the unfolding of the true self from within, rather than the construction of identity based on societal roles. For many women, especially those who have lived with expectations layered upon them, the solitude of living alone becomes the perfect environment for this sacred unfolding. This isn't about being alone in sadness, it's about being alone in truth. In the absence of constant feedback from a partner, from a romantic storyline, from traditional gender expectations, a woman starts to ask different questions. Not, who am I to someone, but who am I really? Not, what do they need, but what do I deeply desire? These questions are not answered overnight. They are lived into, felt in the body, heard in the dream, whispered in the spaces where silence lives. And often, that silence becomes the most honest mirror. Many women begin to remember things they forgot they loved. They reclaim the early whispers of intuition they silenced to keep peace. They remember how it feels to sit in their own rhythm, the wild timing of their breath, the strange beauty of their moods, the sacred yeses and powerful nos that don't need to be explained. Living without a man does not mean living against men. It means no longer filtering one's reality through the gaze of another. It is an invitation to return to oneself, to claim with no apology the territory of the soul. In myths and dreams, the feminine is often symbolized by water. When undisturbed, water reflects. When churned, it distorts. A woman alone returns to the calm waters. She begins to reflect again, not the world's expectations, but the image of the divine within her. Some call this return a spiritual homecoming, others call it sovereignty. Whatever name it wears, the experience is the same. She becomes her own anchor. She stops asking the world for permission. She no longer tolerates masks, and she doesn't shrink herself to fit. Ironically, this depth and presence make her more magnetic, not because she's trying to be, but because the world cannot help but be drawn to someone who is whole. Her solitude does not mark her as incomplete. It reveals that she is full of something few know how to name. She begins to feel less afraid of the unknown. She makes peace with transition. Her relationship with time shifts. No longer anxious to meet deadlines or tick boxes, she lives more fluidly. There is grace in how she handles her own storms now, not because the storms stop, but because she knows she is not made of paper. This is not to say that solitude is always soft or easy. There are nights that ache with longing. There are mornings where doubt creeps in. But over time, she learns to let those feelings pass like weather. She doesn't attach to them. She doesn't define herself by them. She simply allows, watches, and breathes through them. Jung believed that wholeness is the goal, not perfection. A woman walking the path of wholeness learns to hold her own contradictions. She can be strong and still tender. She can enjoy her independence and still crave touch. She can grieve and grow, rest and rise. The world may not understand her. That's okay. She no longer exists for the world's understanding. She exists for her own becoming. The sacred play between freedom and vulnerability. For a woman living alone, the dual forces of freedom and vulnerability intertwine like two dancers, each step revealing more about the self. Freedom offers her the limitless sky. Vulnerability reminds her of the grounding earth. Together, They create a delicate balance, a life lived in authenticity. Freedom is the first intoxicating gift of solitude. No longer bound by the expectations of partnership, she can structure her days as she pleases. Her choices are hers alone, and with them comes an expansiveness that few fully understand. The silence of her home becomes a canvas for her creativity. Her thoughts roam without interruption, and her body moves to its own rhythm without judgment. But with this freedom comes vulnerability, and not just in the form of physical solitude. Vulnerability also shows up as a reckoning with herself, with her deepest fears, and with the truths she has long avoided. In the quiet of her own company, she begins to see the layers of protection she once wore, the personas she adopted to fit into relationships or societal molds. Now, there is nowhere to hide. Jung's exploration of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny or suppress, becomes particularly relevant here. A woman alone is inevitably confronted by her shadow, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. The insecurities, doubts, and wounds she might have overlooked in the noise of companionship now rise to the surface. They whisper, "Look at me, heal me, integrate me." Instead of running, she learns to listen. It's in these moments of vulnerability that true strength emerges. The woman begins to understand that vulnerability is not weakness, it's raw power. It's the courage to face herself fully, to embrace her humanity without shame, and to let the world see her as she truly is. This process can be unsettling. She might feel exposed, even fragile at times, but vulnerability also allows her to connect more deeply with the world. The walls she once built to protect herself start to come down, and in their place, a softer resilience grows. She realizes she doesn't need to armor herself against life. She can flow with it, trusting her inner compass to guide her. As she embraces this dance, she begins to notice a shift in her relationships. Not just romantic ones, but all connections. She no longer tolerates surface-level interactions or the draining dynamics of one-sided giving. Instead, she gravitates toward people who honor her boundaries and match her energy. Her relationships become fewer but richer, built on mutual respect and shared growth. Living alone also teaches her the beauty of impermanence. Without the distractions of partnership, she becomes attuned to the cycles of life, the ebb and flow of emotions, the rise and fall of seasons, the transient nature of all things. She learns to cherish the present moment, knowing it will not last forever. This deepens her appreciation for the simple joys of solitude, a quiet morning, a book read without interruption, the light streaming through her window. In myths and archetypes, the feminine is often portrayed as a mystery, a force that cannot be contained or fully understood. Living alone allows a woman to embody this archetype. She becomes the maiden, mother, and crone all at once, a multifaceted being who holds her own paradoxes with grace. She is the storm and the calm, the nurturer and the warrior, the seeker and the found. Freedom and vulnerability, though seemingly opposites, are two sides of the same coin. Freedom gives her the space to explore. Vulnerability keeps her grounded in her humanity. Together, they shape her into a woman who is both untamed and deeply compassionate, both fearless and tender. The world often misunderstands such women. They might be labeled as lonely or incomplete, but these labels come from a place of fear of the power that such autonomy brings. A woman who is whole unto herself challenges societal norms. She defies the narrative that a woman's worth is tied to her relationship status or her ability to fit into pre-existing roles. Yet she doesn't live to defy. She lives to discover. Her life is not a rebellion, but a revelation, a testament to what is possible when a woman chooses herself. In the end, freedom and vulnerability are not goals to be achieved, but companions on her journey. They walk with her, sometimes pulling her in opposite directions, sometimes leading her to unexpected places. But always, they remind her of the profound truth that living alone is not a limitation, it's an invitation to live fully. The intuition that grows in silence. A woman who lives alone begins to notice something. Her senses sharpen, but not in the way the world often celebrates. It's not just her ability to manage or plan or accomplish, but her sensitivity to what others overlook. The way light filters through her curtains in the morning, the tone behind someone's words, the energy shift in a room. She picks up on these things with an ease she never had before. Alone, her inner life grows louder, clearer, more refined. This isn't about loneliness. It's about becoming attuned. Without constant external noise, her inner voice starts to rise. In many spiritual traditions, solitude is not a punishment, it's a doorway. The desert monks withdrew not to suffer, but to see. Mystics, sages, and oracles often found their visions in isolation. They knew that only in silence does the subtle become visible. Modern life rarely allows for this kind of listening. We're trained to ignore what can't be measured, to override instinct with logic, to stay busy instead of still. But the woman who lives alone begins to reverse this training. She no longer needs the crowd to validate her steps. Her decisions flow from a deeper place, a place that doesn't need loud explanations. She begins to trust a quiet knowing, one that can't always be justified, but is rarely wrong. This intuitive shift affects every part of her life. She starts to choose differently. Food, people, environments, all are filtered through a new lens. She feels pulled toward what nourishes her, repelled by what drains her, and this isn't based on appearances or trends. It's felt, not figured out, and it often surprises even her. Relationships, especially, take on a new dimension. She doesn't chase approval or compromise her peace. She doesn't cling, not because she's cold, but because she understands that forced connections dull the spirit. Instead, she begins to move with a quiet confidence, not needing to be needed, not grasping for attention. She listens before she speaks. She watches, and she notices when things no longer feel aligned. There is power in this level of awareness, and also great responsibility, because the more she sees, the less she can pretend. She cannot return to old versions of herself. She cannot unfeel what has become true. This is the kind of awakening that is irreversible, and often it isolates her further, not because she wants to be distant, but because fewer and fewer people understand the kind of truth she now lives with. In Jungian psychology, the process of individuation requires that we meet parts of ourselves that are buried beneath the roles we've been taught to perform. For the woman alone, this meeting happens often, not in dramatic revelations, but in slow moments of remembering. She begins to reclaim her own authority. She sees how much of her past was spent outsourcing decisions, following paths made for others. Now her compass is internal. And perhaps most importantly, she no longer ignores the subtle. Her dreams, her body's signals, the flicker of unease she used to brush off. These become her guideposts. The world may not reward this way of being with titles or applause, but it rewards her with something else: alignment, peace, a kind of magnetic flow that only occurs when someone lives in truth with themselves. Still, this path isn't without cost. The deeper she sees, the more illusions fall away. And some of those illusions were once comforting. She may grieve what she used to believe about safety, love, or success. But in their place, she builds something stronger. Not belief rooted in fear, but faith born of direct experience. This is not mysticism for mysticism's sake. It's practical, lived spirituality. It's knowing when to say no without guilt. It's recognizing emotional manipulation the moment it appears. It's choosing stillness over endless action. And it's realizing that the answers she spent so long chasing have been whispering to her all along. For many, intuition is dismissed as just a feeling. But to her, it's a language. One she's learning every day, one that protects her, one that leads her forward when logic alone falls short. There's a beauty in this transformation that no mirror can reflect. It's the beauty of becoming whole, not perfect, but fully present, of not waiting for permission to feel, to know, to act. And in this way, the woman who lives alone is not just existing, she's evolving. The fire that does not flicker. When a woman begins living on her own terms, a quiet but unmistakable fire awakens within her. It is not the kind of fire that burns in anger or demands attention. It is steady, controlled, and deeply rooted in self-awareness. This fire doesn't flicker to please others. It doesn't shrink for comfort or expand for show. It simply burns, constant and sure. This inner fire has nothing to prove. It is not trying to be admired or accepted. It is the heat of conviction, of knowing that her path may look strange to others, but feels right to her. It's the strength that keeps her grounded when external voices try to sway her. It is not loud, it does not boast, but it moves everything in its presence. Living alone brings clarity. It strips away distraction and reveals what has always been hidden. In the absence of external roles to play, she confronts herself, not just the image she presents to the world, but the parts of her that have waited years to be seen. She begins to sort through inherited beliefs, cultural expectations, and outdated fears. What remains is the truth of who she is underneath all the noise. And that truth is powerful. It gives her the courage to take up space without apology, to follow creative impulses that once felt silly or unsafe, to no longer hide her ambitions behind politeness or doubt. She stops making herself smaller just to be more acceptable. There's no need to dim her light when it comes from a source so steady and self-fed. She learns the difference between peace and numbness, between contentment and settling. She doesn't confuse comfort with growth anymore. The fire inside of her keeps her from stagnating. It pushes her to ask better questions, to leave situations that no longer serve her, and to walk toward the unknown with faith rather than fear. This strength isn't something she inherited from someone else. It came from nights of questioning, from days of silence, from the small rebellions she chose every time she said no to what wasn't meant for her. She earned it, and yet this strength is not cold or rigid. It allows for softness, just not the kind that compromises her boundaries. Her tenderness is not a weakness, but a gift she shares intentionally. She no longer leaks energy trying to fix others or carry their emotions. She knows when to extend compassion and when to hold the line. She listens to herself first, not last. This shift also changes how she is seen. People begin to respond to her differently. Some feel drawn to her clarity, her presence. Others feel unsettled by it, not because she threatens them, but because she refuses to play along with unspoken games. She does not flatter egos or participate in shallow drama. She does not entertain manipulation or perform what she does not feel. In the past, this might have made her question herself. Now it confirms what she knows. She is living from the inside out, not the outside in. Her sense of worth no longer hinges on acceptance. It stands firm, rooted in something deeper than praise or status. She is not afraid to walk alone, because solitude does not mean emptiness anymore. It means freedom. Jung spoke of individuation as the path toward becoming whole, a process that often requires separation from the collective. For this woman, it means leaving behind what once felt necessary in order to discover what is truly essential. It means burning away illusions and stepping into the light of her own authority. This doesn't mean she has no fear, but she no longer lets fear dictate her steps. She may feel uncertain at times, but she knows how to return to her center. She has built rituals that restore her, practices that reconnect her to her truth. Whether through movement, meditation, writing, or simply stillness, she has learned how to come home to herself. She does not need to be filled. She is not waiting to be saved. She is not half of anything. This inner fire cannot be bought, borrowed, or faked. It arises from living with integrity, from facing the shadows instead of denying them, from choosing presence over performance. This is what makes her radiant, not beauty, not charm, but the fire of authenticity. The world often misunderstands women like this. It labels them too intense, too independent, too much. But what the world cannot see is the deep peace they carry. The kind of peace that comes from knowing who they are and not needing anyone else to confirm it. And though her fire burns quietly, it is seen by those with eyes to see. It inspires, it invites, it reminds others that they too can live in truth. The legacy of the unseen path. What happens when a woman chooses the road that veers away from society's familiar script, the one that tells her who she should be, what she should want, and who she should belong to? What unfolds when she writes her own story, with no co-author dictating the plot? Often, she is met with silence. But in that silence, something extraordinary grows. Legacy. This legacy isn't always written in books or praised in loud voices. It's felt in the subtle shifts, in the way other women watch her and slowly begin to question their own limits. It's in the way her decisions plant new seeds in the collective mind, that there are other ways to live, love, and grow. She becomes a reference point, not a figure of perfection, but a mirror that reflects what is possible when a woman listens only to her own soul. Her very existence disrupts the norms. She may not carry a title, she may not have a spotlight, but she walks with a quiet defiance that bends the air around her. This is not about rejecting love or partnership. It's about refusing to define her life by the absence or presence of either. Her solitude is not a waiting room. It is a chosen temple, and when connection does come, it must meet her at the level of truth, not control, not dependency, not tradition for tradition's sake. She carries the wisdom of discernment. She sees clearly which energies uplift and which deplete. She no longer sacrifices her peace for approval. She no longer waters dead soil hoping for a harvest. Her energy is precious, and she spends it carefully. In myth, the wise woman often lives on the edge of the village, not because she was pushed out, but because her medicine is strongest away from the noise. From that place, she watches, she listens, and when the time comes, she speaks, but only if it serves. This woman is not hardened by solitude. She has been softened in the right places, her heart open to wonder, her hands open to creating, her spirit open to change. She no longer views independence as isolation. She sees it as deep alignment with her inner compass. The world often tells women to be desirable before they are deep, to be pleasant before they are powerful. But the woman who lives on her own terms no longer chooses between the two. She has become both deep and magnetic, powerful and at peace. She no longer bends to fit a mold. She becomes the mold breaker. Jung's teachings emphasize the unconscious forces that shape human behavior, the archetypes that live within us. This woman has faced hers, the maiden who once waited, the mother who once gave until empty, the witch who once hid her knowing. Now she wears them all, integrated, balanced. She is no longer pulled apart by her parts. She is whole. Her daily life may seem ordinary, a cup of tea, a walk in the early light, books that speak to something ancient in her, a space she's shaped with care. But beneath that quiet rhythm, there is a rebellion. She is enough, exactly as she is. Her value isn't measured by how needed she is. She no longer performs emotional labor for the sake of being kept close. Her worth is not tied to what she gives others. It lives in her breath, her choices, her being. Those who cross her path will not forget it. Not because she tried to be unforgettable, but because her presence is honest. And honesty has a frequency. It lingers. It awakens something in others that has long slept. She may walk alone, but she walks with conviction. She may not follow the well-worn trail, but she walks with direction. And in doing so, she becomes a lighthouse to others, not by shining for them, but by showing them they can build their own flame. The woman who lives without a man by her side is not incomplete. She is often simply unwilling to lose herself in places she's outgrown. She has learned that silence can be holy, that space can be sacred, and that her own company is not a void to be filled, but a presence to be cherished. There is no final chapter to her story. She is constantly unfolding, rewriting, becoming, and in every moment she honors that journey. Without apology, without explanation, she leaves behind a new blueprint for others to find. This is not loneliness, this is liberation. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.